The Laura Ingraham Show.
Paul Ryan actually came out yesterday and argued that the CBO report was better than they had hoped. Well, there was some great news on the deficit. $337 billion would be cut in the coming decade with the GOP healthcare plan. But everyone knows the big story is going to be that 24 million people are uninsured by 2026 and 14 million just over the next year. They all knew that was going to be the storyline. So why were we not better prepared for it? 855-40-LAURA. Here's a simple question today on a snowy day where everybody's minds are somewhere else, obviously. Are Republicans good storytellers here? How are we telling the story about Obamacare's implosion? We're telling it with charts and numbers. We're telling it with emotion. We're telling it with what? We're telling it with human interest stories. We're telling it with suffering. No, we're telling it with sterile numbers, brittle numbers that do not hit the general public in the heart. It does not work. The Democrats are always better at manipulating the emotion.
Obamacare is collapsing. The insurers are telling us the premium increases we got just this year from Obamacare, 25% on average, will be even higher next year. So this, compared to the status quo, is far better. I'm excited about this analysis. And yeah, I think they sort of overestimate the uninsured number, just like they overestimated who would be insured by Obamacare. But I do believe that if we're not going to force people to buy something they don't want to buy, they won't buy it. And that's kind of obvious.
Newt Gingrich went on Fox last night, and Newt Gingrich's entire focus was how CBO is corrupt. Now, I understand what he's saying. I mean, CBO has been wrong on a bunch of issues. The head of the CBO is now a Republican pick, however. I get that, but I don't think that that's the right way to go here. I think the right way to go is what Rand Paul and Tom Cotton has been saying. Repeal all of Obamacare. Repeal it. You have a 2-year phase out, so no one's going to be thrown off their plans in the next 2 years. But at the same time, separately, you introduce the legislation that will actually accomplish what you want accomplished. Expanding options in healthcare for every American, lowering the price of healthcare, and then the offshoot would be lowering the price of insurance. Creating for the individual market, which is a total ripoff. Total ripoff. If you buy an individual policy or a small group policy, they're extremely expensive. If you're in a large business or large association, you have a pre-existing condition, you get hired by a company, then you're covered. You're covered by that company's plan. But if you're an individual policy holder or you're in a small group, 5 or below, which a lot of Americans are, right? Before Obamacare, yeah, you could get kicked off your plan could be canceled. Why shouldn't those people, according to Rand Paul, and I think he's right, why shouldn't those people be allowed to join large association plans across state lines? If you're living in a neighborhood, and maybe it's an urban neighborhood, and you're near, for instance, the ABA offices, and you went to law school years ago, or your wife's a paralegal, why shouldn't you be able to join the ABA's association, which would allow you to join this large group plan? The certification of large associations, all of this should be made easier. That would bring down the cost of health care, health insurance for all people. And the health care cost would be brought down by going after the antitrust exemptions that the insurance companies get. All these things that Paul Ryan plans for phase 3, which Tom Cotton correctly said on our show yesterday. I assume we have the soundbite, but who knows? Where he said yesterday, look, that's a fantasy. That's mythic. It's not going to happen. You're not going to have phase 3. It's not going to happen. If you had the 60 votes for phase 3, why wouldn't we all just do it now? Why wouldn't you do it now? He's exactly right. Then you force the Democrats' hand on this. The Republicans are right on the substance, most usually, but they're terrible storytellers. And I think Ryan's point here, which is, well, it's procedural, you can't get the 60 votes, he doesn't have really an answer for what Tom Cotton is saying here.
Let me just say this, Laura, about this so-called three-phase process. That's just not going to happen. That's just politicians' talk. It's just all talk. It's just spin. Phase one under this, as you say, is a so-called reconciliation bill that can pass with a simple majority in the Senate. Phase two is as yet unwritten regulations, which are going to be subject to the whims of the most liberal judge in America. And phase three is some imaginary bill that might pass with Democratic support. Well, if we had Democratic support, we wouldn't need phase two and phase three. We would.
Okay, we edited him weirdly there. We wouldn't have this. Exactly. He's making the exact point. If we have the 60 votes, and the 60 votes, 60 votes exist for phase three, do it now. That way you force the Democrats' hands. Now you had Chuck Schumer out there yesterday. You know what he was saying? Yesterday, Chuck Schumer was saying, well, Donald Trump promised people could compete across state lines. Where's that? You allowed Chuck Schumer to make the Republicans' argument yesterday. It's ridiculous. 855-40-LAURA. Let's go to Troy in Montana on line 1. Troy.
Hi, Laura. I'm calling you this morning because I'm a little frustrated with this health care plan. My mom was diagnosed terminal ill with cancer in December. I've been going through her medical bills. Just in 3 months, she's at $500,000. They're charging her $50,000 per chemo treatment, $25 for every pair of rubber gloves they use. The little blood pressure thing the pulse thing they put on her finger, $170 every time they see her. It's out of control.
Right, we can't wait till phase three. That's the medical monopolies. That's why they're allowed to charge these astronomical rates. There's no transparency for most people in pricing. There's collusion among healthcare providers, and they're allowed to do this. And it just got to stop. You have to have real competition, which will not happen with this Ryan Care replacement. It's just not going to happen. And we know it's not going to happen. You'll save some money on the deficit over 10 years, and I'm not saying that's not a good thing. But the cleanest and clearest way to capture the narrative and push forward the real reform that we know will have long-term healthy consequences for America, you know what that is? That's what Rand Paul and Tom Cotton are arguing for. That's what Jim Jordan is arguing for. And Paul Ryan says he's for a lot of these reforms, so that's great. So do them now. Have the debate now. Don't have it at the end of the year or next year or the year after. Do you agree with me that Donald Trump is being set up for a trap here? And I don't think he probably is aware of it. By 2020, the state budgets are going to be imploding because of this Medicare deal. They will be imploding. The people in the states are going to be asking, whoa. We were promised this. We were told that this was going to make our lives better. And meanwhile, we're still going to have the rising premiums. We're still going to have the rising out-of-pocket expenses because Obamacare wasn't really fully repealed. Part of it was, but toxic parts of it was not. They were not repealed. 855-40-LAURA. We're going to take a break on the Laura Ingraham Show. We're going to talk to Vice President Pence about this. Byron York's going to stop by. A great new book by the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. We're going to talk about that. We love to encourage great reading and great work, both nonfiction and fiction on this show. We'll get to that. But the selling of the replacement, it's easily done. But everyone has to get back on the same page. What are we after? Not just access to coverage. We're after healthcare costs decreasing, like technology decreases in prices, like LASIK surgery decreased in pricing. It's possible with a true free market in healthcare. It's not going to happen if we're going down this road. 855-40-LAURA. We'll take a break. Get your reaction to this and a lot more coming up. So they have to cast this as the worst possible alternative for Americans when Obamacare was the worst possible alternative for Americans. And Paul Ryan comes out and he rightly says Obamacare is imploding. The exchanges aren't going to be able to be sustained. There are fewer choices in health care than ever before for Americans. Many of them lost their doctors. They lost their insurance. And the price of health care keeps going up, 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 and up. And all I can say is, you got to be able to tell the story well.
How do you answer the criticism that this plan amounts to tax cuts and money to wealthier Americans who maybe didn't vote for the president?
We promised at the very outset we were going to repeal all of the taxes, okay? And that's what the proposed bill does, at least all the taxes you can. We do it in such a fashion that we think allows these folks to be able to afford to go to the doctor. Who cares if somebody else benefits? Why do you have to have a system that punishes somebody in order to help somebody else? We think we've created a system that saves money and allows more people to get affordable health care. Why would it be bad if folks benefit from a small tax reduction at the same time?
Well, of course, Mick Mulvaney, who's the head of OMB, he's right about that. There's no doubt about it. But again, the cleanest, clearest way forward, which you have to be bold to do, and Trump campaigned on bold action. And I think that's so much of what appealed to voters. It was bold. He said on day one, we are going to repeal and then replace Obamacare. That's what the Republicans should do. This isn't the best effort. Maybe it's a first step. Maybe now they see we can do this better. I hope so. I'm going to stay optimistic. But I don't know. We're going to talk to Vice President Pence about it coming up in just a few moments. I guess he's on next, last hour of the show. Let's go to David in Indiana. On line 1, David.
Good morning, Laura. Thank you. You know, my opinion on this and your comments on Schumer are related. All of this actually precedes Trump. As Republicans and conservatives, we had an opportunity, or at least it seemed like the Freedom Caucus was on the verge of potentially putting up a different speaker. I think this whole mess that we as conservatives are in right now was foreseeable by by allowing Paul Ryan to become Speaker of the House. Frankly, the guy's a squish, nice guy, but he's John Boehner light, and I just feel like this entire mess could have been avoided by putting up an actual constitutional conservative who would have the intestinal fortitude to put up a repeal bill, as they did in December, pass the darn thing, and move on.
Well, I think that the Freedom Caucus made a calculation to work with Ryan. I think we also have to remember they don't have the numbers that they need in the Freedom Caucus, not yet. And I think they could have stopped Ryan if they wanted to. A lot of folks thought Ryan was better as head of budget, really good at budget stuff, talented at the numbers game. But when it comes to communication strategy, selling a clear alternative to the Democrats' big government, top-down approach to health care, I think it could be done a lot better. And, I also think people like Mike Pence, I think he understands this. I really do. I think it's a very early on in the administration, and the rush was on. It is shocking, 7 years after Obamacare passed, there was not a clear, agreed-upon strategy where each aspect of the major Trump promises and the major Trump reforms wasn't considered and messaged well. That is shocking to me. And I think they were probably going to have to revisit some of the things that they wanted to do, like the 26-year-olds can stay on their parents' plan. And I think someone had to go to President Trump and say, I know you said this on the campaign trail, but guess what? You're actually gonna have a better deal than that for most young people, because they'll have to be able to have real choices in health care, minimal plans. They're not going to have plans that cover prenatal care if they're like a 23-year-old guy. So anyway, we'll talk about that more with Byron York. And a bombshell tape came out from October. What did Paul Ryan say in this tape about Donald Trump? We'll tell you when we come back. I was like, well, when is Schumer going to grab that microphone from her? Because you never know quite where Nancy Pelosi is going to end up when she begins a sentence. She always has to edge her way back from the end of the branch and back to the trunk of the tree because she tends to get lost. But how you doing? Good to talk to you.
I'm doing well, and if anybody can't talk about sort of hiding what's in legislation or pushing legislation through, it's got to be Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, these two characters up there yesterday, they have a lot of experience with this. But I want to talk about a couple aspects of what we're seeing with this healthcare debate and as it's playing out, Byron, with you. Number one, I want to talk about the facts, and then I want to get into the narrative and whether Republicans are winning the narrative or losing the narrative. Just on the facts of the repeal and replace as offered by Paul Ryan. Is this gelling with the public? Are they getting the understanding that this really is going to be better than Obamacare? And look, it reduces the deficit, according to the CBO, by almost $350 billion over 10 years. That's a good thing.
I don't think they're really getting that idea, because you have to remember in the campaign, Donald Trump said, we're going to have something really great. It's going to cover everybody for less cost. Now, maybe that was unrealistic, but that's what he said. And this doesn't do that. And I think that there are a couple of problems with it. One, when the CBO came out and said that 24 million fewer people will have health care coverage after 10 years of this plan, Paul Ryan came out and said, well, yeah, but that's kind of what freedom looks like, that people won't be forced, there won't be a mandate, and they won't have to. So he was kind of saying that, Obamacare offered people a really bad product, and unless it was super heavily subsidized, they just didn't buy it because they didn't want it. And he's saying, well, now, they won't want it either, and they won't buy it. And I think we should really kind of start from the idea that it is actually better to have more people covered, and that was the goal of this plan. And Tom Price, the HHS secretary, says it absolutely is, and he believes that more people will be covered than are now. But it seems to me that its deficit reduction, while good, $300+ billion, is probably not enough to make up for the fact that fewer people are going to be covered under it.
And I said this on Fox and Friends, and I don't think it's all that insightful, but I mean, they knew that this report was going to be bad for them on the uninsured. They knew it. And they introduced their legislation before they had consulted with the CBO. That was one thing that was a little strange. It's not unprecedented. But then I think what people like Tom Cotton and Rand Paul are saying is, if you did what Trump campaigned on that he would do, you repeal the entire Obamacare and then immediately embark on the debate on the increasing competition, increasing choices, broadening coverage, because the cost of health care could be cut dramatically, in some cases 60 to 70%, in a true free market for health care, where it's like unbundling on cable television. You can unbundle plans. That's a lot of us want, because we don't watch a lot of these TV networks. But now Republicans are debating, this goes to the narrative question, they're debating, well, we think only 17 million people are going to be off their plan, and they think 24 million. That's a loser narrative for the Republicans.
Yes, it certainly is. And also, I think the idea of this three-part plan is complicated and unrealistic. Because remember, the Democrats resorted to reconciliation to pass Obamacare, not because it was a good idea, but because they lost to Scott Brown in Massachusetts. They lost Ted Kennedy's Senate seat.
Right, I remember. I was involved.
They lost their 60-vote majority in the Senate. So and there were 0 Republicans on board. Now, the part of the health care plan, the Republican plan that we're talking about now, is the one designed to go to the Senate and be passed under those reconciliation rules. And then the idea is to pass other measures, for example, like cutting down the differences between the states or allowing the sale of insurance across state lines. That will be passed later. Now, that's not passed under reconciliation, meaning, of course, Democrats will filibuster and 60 votes will be required, and that's not going to happen. So this is kind of an unrealistic scheme that they have here.
Do you think from your reporting, Byron, do you think President Trump or the people close to him, they're involved in a lot of things. They're trying to tackle a lot of things at once. Do you think he's getting the right advice on this? I mean, internally, I think that it's curious.
Well, you have to remember this has happened before. Back in Obamacare, there were a lot of Democrats who criticized the White House, the Obama White House, for letting Congress take the lead on this, and they were having hearings and doing this bill, and it really was kind of the product of, it's called Obamacare, but it's what the Democrats in Congress put together. So I think White Houses kind of do this, and I think there's two competing impulses. For me, I would have thought maybe the smartest thing for Trump to start out with was a big jobs and infrastructure plan. Now, that would alienate some Republicans, there's no doubt about it, but it would get Democratic support, I think. But on the other hand, Republicans have run on the idea of repealing Obamacare for 7 years now. Mm-hmm. And the rhetoric got pretty hot, and the idea was to repeal every single word of Obamacare, pull it out root and branch, even when it was clear that once you do that, we really can't go back to the status quo of 2009 because the insurance companies have changed the way they operate. I mean, the healthcare system has accommodated Obamacare for better or for worse, a lot of it for worse, but it's happened. So you have to come up with a plan to get from where you are now to what you think is a better Republican plan. It's really complicated, and it took the Democrats more than a year to do it with 60 votes in the Senate and 253 votes in the House, which are way bigger majorities than Republicans have now.
I want to play a soundbite for you, which is it's uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable soundbite that Breitbart published today. And it was Paul Ryan back in October on a conference call after the Billy Bush tape came out. Let's listen.
There are basically two things that I want to make really clear. As for myself as your speaker, I am not going to defend Donald Trump. Not now, not in the future. As you probably heard, I just invited him from my first congressional district GOP event this weekend, a thing I do every year. And I'm not going to be campaigning with him over the next 30 days.
I play that because it's interesting to kind of farm out the entire Obamacare repeal and replace agenda to Paul Ryan, who was just, he was expecting Trump was going to go down, and he wasn't going to lift a finger to help him. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, first of all, as far as the tape is concerned, this was reported at the time. The substance of it was reported at the time that Ryan had said this was right after the release of the Access Hollywood tape, and that Ryan had said he would not support or wouldn't campaign for Trump or defend Trump. But we all know that politics changes. Elections change things, and Ryan has had to accept the fact that Trump is the president of the United States of his own party. And do I believe that Paul Ryan is deliberately sandbagging this effort, leading Republicans to some catastrophic failure because he wants to get at Trump? No, I don't think that. I think that the fact is Republicans have had 7 years to come up with to agree on a Obamacare replacement plan. Until now, they never have because it was really so hard and the choices were very, very difficult. So the idea that this is tough is not a problem of Paul Ryan's loyalty. It's just the nature of. But
there's a fundamental disagreement. I agree with you. It's not Paul Ryan's not setting a trap. I don't mean that. I mean Trump is walking into something that probably is not going to pass, and that will then look bad for him. When I think the conception of this was poorly done. But what I'm trying to get at is Paul Ryan and a lot of the conservatives have fundamentally different views on how to spur competition in healthcare. Ryan and other Republicans get big support from Big Pharma. He was against that drug reimportation bill some years back, Medicare Part D. There's a philosophical difference, is there not, between the Ryan wing of the Republican Party and the more conservative wing, Rand Paul, Cotton.
Right. And you're absolutely right. And Donald Trump actually came out in favor of this drug reimportation.
Right.
I remember going to a rally in New Hampshire where he.
But not Ryan. but not Ryan.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But let me give you one other possibility for this healthcare stuff, which is the House passes a bill. It goes to the Senate, and the Senate essentially hits Control A, Select All, Delete, and starts over, and comes up with a different bill. Now it's not any easier with the Senate doing it, but they may come up with something that's more passable, more modest, and more passable. Because this Republican bill seems to have kind of the worst of a lot of different elements in it, and they've had this, obviously Republicans have not been able to come together. But I keep saying it, they never have been able to come together about this, because this is something that they're just deeply divided about.
Yeah, well, that's a that's a real problem. So I guess Ryan just
what they did first, and that's what they take first out of the box. And by the way, they say the reason they're doing that is that because they can't do their budget or their tax reform without passing this.
Oh boy, this is like it's a chicken and egg problem here, and the egg might be some mutant chicken coming out of it. It's terrifying. Okay, this was Spicer yesterday at the briefing. Of course, their media won't let go of the Trump wiretapping tweet of a couple of weeks ago, and this is how the question was posed and answered.
When should Americans trust the president? Should they trust the president? Is it phony or real when he says that President Obama was wiretapped?
He doesn't really think that President Obama went up and tapped his phone personally. I think, but I think there's no question that the Obama administration, that there were actions about surveillance and other activities that occurred in the 2016 election. That is a widely reported activity that occurred back then. The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities during that.
Yeah, well, I think wiretap has a pretty clear definition, does it not, Byron?
Yes, but actually, to tell you the truth, I don't have that much trouble with what Sean Spicer is saying there, because, yes, the question of did Barack Obama specifically wiretap Donald Trump, the answer is probably going to be no. The question is, did the Obama administration wiretap some members of the Trump circle? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not ready to say no. What we do know is that there were a lot of wiretaps going around in this investigation. You just look at the news stories of the last several months that have been big scoops about Trump and Russia. Most of them have the word intercept or intercepted in them. They're talking about wiretaps, intercepted phone calls, intercepted bank records, financial records, intercepted electronic communications.
But why didn't they do that? Why didn't they clean up that narrative the day after the tweet then? Why is it 2 weeks later after he's gotten pummeled on this?
Because he always overstates things. Trump comes out and says Barack Obama is the founder of ISIS. All right, and Hugh Hewitt says to him, "Oh, I know what you mean. I mean, what you're saying really is that Obama created the conditions through which ISIS could be created." And Trump says, "No, I mean Barack Obama's the founder of ISIS."
Yeah.
So he always overstates things, but it leads people to begin to look into what's actually going on. And if they don't confirm what Trump says in this case, they find out more about all of these wiretaps. And I would like to know, for example, what was going on with.
But why can't Trump? Donald Trump could actually, force a release of all of the individuals, for instance, who had access to these intercepts within the government. He doesn't have to make it public, but they can find out who and who did not have access to these intercepts and how they unmask the American on the other end of it. If they're just, for instance, wiretapping the Russian ambassador, and then they get the dragnet of the American who is speaking to him or any other Russian, well, they can find that out. So exactly. I think maybe we'll see that coming out in the days and weeks ahead. I should hope so. Byron York, could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, always enjoy it.
It's always fun. We'll take a break. Close out this hour. Don't go away. Love our country. That's controversial today. That's controversial. Why? Why is that controversial? People who come to America should come here not just because they want to make a paycheck or they want to send money back home. That's not what America was built on. A belief in freedom, a desire to be American, not to just have a passport, like people coming here and taking advantage of birthright citizenship. They want a passport. Why? The Chinese come here because they want a passport into our university system. People from Central America, Mexico, other countries come here, sometimes illegally, sometimes legally, 8, 9 months pregnant, have a child, get a passport. Some of them go home, some of them stay and say, you can't deport me now. That's what our framers intended? I don't think so. That's not what they intended. They intended that this was going to be the land of the free, and it would be the home of the brave, and you come here, you buy into what America is, not just a paycheck. Teddy Roosevelt's famous line, we're not just a polyglot boarding house where people come and live for a while. No. You have to believe in America. Your identity is American. That's why I've never liked the hyphenated references. African American, Italian American, Polish American, American. We're Americans of African descent or Irish. Yeah, fine. Be proud of your heritage. My mother always loved to make Polish food, and she spoke Polish at times with her old friends, but she was American, and she loved America. So Stephen King is now getting filleted for saying this. Paul Ryan hit him hard yesterday as well, as you heard in that Tucker Carlson interview. Paul Ryan's audio of that Trump call, conference call from October is, well, somehow hearing it. We heard it reported back in October after the Billy Bush tape came out, but hearing it is something quite different, I think. We'll play that in a little bit. But, I mean, if you have a declining birth rate, and you have open borders, what does that mean? What's going to happen to your country? You're going to lose your country. The Week did a piece back in August of last year. America's birth rate is now a national emergency. The new birth rate numbers are out, and they're a disaster. There are now only 59.6 births per 1,000 women, the lowest rate ever recorded in the United States. Some of the decrease is due to good news, which is the continuing decline of teen pregnancies, but most of it is due to people getting married later and choosing to have fewer children. And the worst part is everyone is treating the news with a shrug. Let's go to Andrew in Indiana, very patient on line 2. Andrew, welcome.
Hi. My argument is that if you were to have a stagnant GDP and a declining birth rate, and you're automating the menial task jobs, and GDP per capita is increasing, Americans are getting wealthier per person.
Okay, so
you don't need immigration necessarily.
Oh, I see what
to
you're saying.
Replace
yep.
jobs that are being
I get
automated, and individual Americans can prosper more per person than with just arbitrarily adding people to the mix to say we have to have an increasing birth rate. That's not necessarily true. Look at Japan, although you can argue their GDP per person is looking pretty good. You can have a decline in GDP nationally as long as your GDP per person continues to get better. That's real prosperity for each and every individual American.
No, I see what you're saying, and you could make a different argument as well. I mean, if we didn't have 45 million or 55 million abortions since Roe versus Wade, we wouldn't have to have this argument at all about the supposed need for all this cheap labor coming into the United States. Would have a lot more people. Their argument is always, well, we don't have enough people to pay for the elderly and the Social Security. Well, we aborted tens of millions of people in this country. They're gone. They never had a chance to live. And all these jobs that Americans wouldn't do, we all did them. We all did these jobs growing up. I did, from raking lawns to delivering newspapers to picking fruit. My brother picked tobacco. We did these jobs. Some of them will be automated, not all of them. And there are always going to be different jobs that robots won't do. I mean, the robotics argument only goes so far. But I see your overall point. My point is slightly different, is that I don't think you can measure health and wellness just in terms of money either. If you're either aborting or contracepting your way out of out of replenishing your population, I don't think that's ultimately ever going to be good. I really don't. I think you have to have an increasing birth rate, and have a vibrant economy at the same time that allows people to support themselves. But interesting conversation. Let's go to Carol in Iowa. A lot of Iowans are speaking out in favor of their congressman. Carol, go ahead.
Oh, I totally support Representative King. His sin is he's not politically correct. He goes by the Constitution, and he spoke out against open borders and against abortion. And, you know, he wasn't being racist. He was just telling the truth. And he's not against immigration or immigrants. He just wants it done according to the law and according to the Constitution.
Well, and it's, again, you don't have a right to be here if you're in another country. This idea that everyone who wants to come here can come here is just ludicrous. And I think all these liberals are like, oh, you know, we welcome people from all over. There are these signs now, by the way. There are these signs that say, "What neighbor, we welcome you no matter where you're from," and you're and there are three colors. On top is English, second is in Spanish, and third is in Arabic. These are signs all over Washington D.C. Okay, and until some of the more radical types move into your neighborhood, I guess. But it sounds good in theory. Well, until we see some of the violence that we've seen in other countries. Well, thank God we've been spared some of that. But we still have recruiting trials going on in St. Paul, Minnesota for Al-Shabaab. Jim in Missouri on line 3. Jimmy, we're going to talk to Vice President Pence coming up, by the way.
Yes.
Jim.
Hello. I just wanted to offer my perspective on this whole immigration issue and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an educator. I'm my 52nd year in education. I'm a professor, and I'm a conservative professor, one of the less than, I'm estimating 5%, probably smaller. But anyway, I will point to one sort of event in about 1970, coming out of the curriculum movement, was this notion of the United States is no longer a melting pot, we're a mosaic. The mosaic started the trend of maintaining languages in schools. Like in St. Louis, my understanding is that the St. Louis City school system supports 40 different languages.
Yeah, same with Northern
in their
Virginia.
Instructional programs.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that the people don't want to learn English, and by definition, a country is defined by its borders, its language, and its culture. We've opened our borders, we've compromised our language, and the final analysis will mean there is no more United States, there is no America, and it's really a sad thing to see that.
Well, yeah. Well, how did we become? How did we become a country where it's routine to say one of our most cherished values is diversity, when there's actually no diversity of thought in key sectors of our country? There's no diversity of thought expressed freely. I'm talking about free expression on the university setting. In corporate America, big corporations become like mini governments, where, again, if you speak your mind on a hot button social issue, you speak your mind on Trump, how comfortable do you think it'll be for you? Look at the protesters were out in front of Peter Thiel's house in San Francisco over the weekend, Saturday morning. They want to intimidate Americans who disagree with them. But they love diversity. What does that mean? Colors, skin colors? Now you're different if you have a different skin color. Well, yes, but what about the content of your character? What about your intellectual makeup, your political understanding? Isn't that diversity? So this idea, well, diversity. No, we are a country that believes in freedom, liberty. We treat individuals without regard to their skin color, without regard to their ethnicity. And yes, we believe in the freedom to worship and to pray and to free exercise of your religion. But it doesn't mean that America has to change for you. It means that America won't, we're not going to dictate the terms of your worship, but we don't have to change for what you believe if you come from another place with totally different values. It's like Saudi Arabians coming here and thinking, oh, how do you, and they have these incidents every now and then at the malls in Northern Virginia where you have, people of certain backgrounds tisking girls and wearing shorts. Well, if you don't like the people wearing shorts in the United States, then you can go back to where you're from. It's ridiculous. The ACLU's Anthony Romer has spoken out on the he's all on the immigration fight and the ban and the Trump ban, and they're going to keep their protests going. Well, they want to intimidate congressmen and senators from representing the interests of native-born Americans who are here and who believe that the American understanding should be held up as exceptional and beautiful, and that the melting pot doesn't require, as our caller said, it's an interesting point, are we a mosaic or a melting pot? I think the melting pot keeps a country unified. But remember, when you can't really teach patriotism as it used to be taught in schools, when you're always questioning, now we have to rip statues down, now we have to examine the dark side, the dark side of the American founding. Everything's dark about America. Everything's brighter overseas or in other cultures. But America's a dark, rotten, awful place. How do you teach national unity if that's what kids are getting out of the curriculum today? 855-40-LAURA. We're going to talk to Vice President Pence. He's going to be joining us. The fight's ahead on health care, on tax reform, on the deregulatory moves that Trump is doing. These are great things. Yesterday, more good news on the effort to deregulate where it needs to be deregulated. We'll take a break. 855-40-LAURA. Don't go away. Republicans tend to respond with charts and numbers. Charts and numbers are brittle things, but they want to go right to the sob stories, and they think they have the emotion on their side. But the CBO report said that by 2024, 2026, there'll be 24 million people who do not have health insurance, although lots of savings over the next decade, $343 billion in savings on the deficit. Joining us now, I'm delighted he is with us, Vice President Mike Pence, to discuss this and so much more, surviving the blizzard in Washington, D.C. Vice President Pence, how are you? Great to talk to you.
I'm great, Laura. Good to be with you. And for a city known for snow jobs, they still got a pretty good dose. But
oh my goodness,
the White House got here early, and we're working hard.
Well, let's talk about the Democrat assault on what you all are trying to do. Yesterday, it was an all-out push against the Ryan idea, the Ryan plan. Your reaction to Schumer and to many others today who say, look, Donald Trump promised coverage for Americans who want coverage, and this will leave many uncovered.
Well, I certainly understand why they want to change the subject from Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster, as you just said. It is collapsing. I was in Kentucky this last Saturday. And Humana, the large health insurance provider, is actually based in Louisville, Kentucky. They just announced that they're pulling out of the Kentucky healthcare exchange because they can't make it work, even though they're based in Kentucky. Anthem just sent out a letter, one of the largest insurers in the country, announcing that they are poised to be pulling out of healthcare exchanges. That literally is collapsing. I have to tell you that while there's so much focus on the CBO score, and I'm happy to talk to you about that, the very suggestion that enrollment, you see some of these lines of uninsured, the very idea that enrollment under Obamacare is going to remain the same where it is, ignores the fact that insurance companies around the country are literally fleeing from these healthcare exchanges. Obamacare is a collapsing building of failed public policy, and what the president has called on the Congress to do, and what the Congress is in the process of beginning, is a multi-step process that will repeal Obamacare in its entirety and replace it with health policies that give the American people more choices, that allow the free market to work, that allow states to innovate and reform Medicaid in ways that will serve people's needs more effectively and more efficiently. And we're going to continue. We're going to continue to drive that policy forward. Even as we amend the bill, we work through the bill, we improve it along the way.
On the issue of repealing it entirely, I'll take issue with that because I think the under 26 is not repealed. The pre-existing condition issue is not repealed. You exchange subsidies for tax credits, which is different, but still will ultimately cost the Treasury some money. But Tom Cotton specifically responded to that idea of the multi-step process yesterday on our show.
Let me just say this, Laura, about this so-called three-phase process. That's just not going to happen. That's just politicians' talk. It's just all talk. It's just spin. Phase one under this, as you say, is a so-called reconciliation bill that can pass with a simple majority in the Senate. Phase two is as yet unwritten regulations, which are going to be subject to the whims of the most liberal judge in America. And phase three is some imaginary bill that might pass with Democratic support. Well, if we had Democratic support, we wouldn't need phase two and phase three.
What of that, Vice President Pence?
Well, first off, Senator Cotton is my friend, and he is a great American. I'm looking forward to sitting down with him over coffee when I'm back on Capitol Hill this afternoon. But look, there's a lot of things about President Donald Trump that people said would never happen, right? And I'll tell you, the president is absolutely committed to keep the promise he made to the American people to repeal Obamacare. This first bill will basically take all the worst elements of Obamacare out, the tax increases, the penalties. I mean, it essentially takes away the core of Obamacare, which is the ability to force people to buy health insurance or pay a tax if they don't. That goes away. We effectively block grant Medicaid to the states. We do it essentially giving the states more freedom, more flexibility to reform Medicaid.
I think that's all good.
And then through the regulation, it's historic. You know that. You've been a champion of that for many years, Laura. That Tom Price is currently working on regulations that will allow a national marketplace to be created on a regulatory basis, stabilize the insurance markets. But the president is absolutely determined. And there's about 10 Democrats in the Senate who were elected and are up for re-election, rather. They were elected in states that went strongly for President Trump on November the 8th. We're going to go out and go into those states and say, look, we want to wipe away every last vestige of this disastrous policy of Obamacare, and we want to put into the law that people will be able to buy health insurance across state lines. That's a fight the president is willing to take all across this country, including the Senator Cotton state, and I'll be right there shoulder to shoulder with him, and we're going to win that argument.
I think most Republicans agree on the substance of what you're saying, what much of what Ryan has promised in these other stages. I think what both Rand Paul and Tom Cotton are saying is Republicans tend to lose the narrative on what something represents if they don't go bold. And so going bold, and I spoke to Rand Paul at length about this yesterday. Going bold is a full repeal of Obamacare, full, now. Right. At the same time, what Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail, an immediate replacement bill, which would force the Democrats to defend a lack of competition across state lines, the antitrust exemption for the healthcare industry, the monopolistic practices of healthcare providers, the lack of transparency in pricing of healthcare services, all those things that would be promised down the road in a phase three. Why not have that argument now? If you're going to be able to do it in phase three, do it right now. Suddenly they become the defenders of the status quo, and the Republicans become the innovators for broadened choices and more coverage. That's their point. And wouldn't that unify the Republican Party, Vice President Pence, around those very ideas that I think you support and Donald Trump supports, and do it now? That way you guys have all that running room to go to all those states like, Wisconsin and North Dakota and all those vulnerable senators. Do it right now with the full replacement vehicle.
Well, let me say same thing about Senator Rand Paul I said about Tom Cotton. These are great senators. These are great conservatives. But look, the president wanted to do repeal and replace at the same time, and the fact is that in this first bill, we will be doing historic reform of Medicaid. Now, we could just, I guess you could just go the route the Congress went a year ago, and that is just undo everything and then try and do the Medicaid thing down the road. But the president said, look, let's do everything that we can do in this budget bill that only requires 51 votes. And we're doing a broad range of things. Health savings accounts being expanded, Medicaid going down to the states where we can innovate in ways like, frankly, we did a little bit of in the state of Indiana, and pulling out those tax increases. I think $500 billion in tax increases imposed on American families. But do what you can do right now, do what we can do through regulation, and then I promise you, like I don't have to tell you because you know the president very well, and he thinks the world of you. The president is anxious to go out and fight for the balance of this repeal and replace plan. We all are. We all know we can go win it. But let's do what we can to pull this failed policy off the backs of American families. I don't know if you checked out, the president literally had Obamacare victims from around the country sitting in the Roosevelt Room just day before yesterday. And these are heartbreaking stories, Laura, of people who literally have lost their
we all
coverage.
agree on this. This is all agreement.
We're
unified on that point.
I know, but the people, what the other side does in the media, not you, what many in the national media do is they say, well, if you have coverage under Obamacare, then you have care.
No. Access to coverage doesn't mean care.
Sat around the table. They said, look, I've got a card in my pocket. I got a big subsidy, but I got a deductible of $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. So I essentially don't have health care for my family. And the president knows we can do better than that.
Do you think Vice President Pence that you think this legislation as it is now is going to pass? I mean, my view is if Ryan had the votes, they'd call the vote. They don't have the votes for this right now. Otherwise, they'd call the vote. And the Senate is probably a bigger hurdle. Do you think this is going to pass the way it is? And if not, would you go back to the drawing board, pull Obamacare altogether, and go for the full repeal in a broad-based legislation that includes all the things you're talking about?
Well, the reason it's not being called to a vote right now is because, different than Obamacare, the House of Representatives is going through the committee process. They did 2 committees last week, Budget Committee this week. I mean, they literally are doing all of this in the public, out in the open. It'll be on the floor next week. There are amendments being considered as we speak to improve this bill. The leadership in the White House are all listening carefully.
I hope it's not a trap.
About ways we can improve
I worry it's a trap, Vice President Pence, for both you and President Trump. That's what my concern.
I understand that.
Because I want you to be successful. I have one. Can we move just to one more topic? Because I think we've gotten all we can get on the healthcare. Julian Assange, of course, the WikiLeaks founder, has tweeted out 2 fairly controversial, incendiary things today. He said that Clinton stated privately this month that she is quietly pushing for a Pence takeover. She stated that Pence is predictable, hence defeatable. And they quote 2 sources, intelligence community sources, who didn't say that you agree with this takeover, but that intelligence community officials close to Pence stated privately this month that they're planning on a Pence takeover. What's your reaction to that?
I would find that all of that dialogue to be absurd and frankly offensive. It is the greatest honor of my life to serve shoulder to shoulder with the 45th President of the United States and to see his leadership every day, to see the compassion that he has for the American people every day. I would dismiss that out of hand and tell you that I'm so excited about the progress that we've made, strengthening this country, protecting this country, reviving this country's economy, and all credit goes to President Donald Trump.
Do you think that that we as Republicans and President Trump specifically, it's easy to talk about what's bad with liberalism, and I do that a lot, but maybe we need to talk about what's great about conservatism. More choices, more freedom, greater competition. I think that inspirational, aspirational rhetoric that we heard in the joint session speech, it was so great. I just loved that speech. That was like, I was on cloud nine after that speech. It was awesome. And I think you've done that a lot throughout your career. I think that, again, it makes the Democrats defend the status quo, which is terrible. We like that.
So is the president. I mean, you've known the president a long time. I mean, he is an optimist. He's a man that believes in this country. I mean, at the very core of this debate over Obamacare is their vision, Chuck Schumer's vision, Barack Obama's vision, was to order every American to buy health insurance or pay a tax if they didn't. What President Trump believes in is if you unleash the power of the marketplace, if you give Americans more choices and create a competitive environment, you'll see costs come down. Americans will buy health insurance that they want, not that the government dictates. And you give states more freedom to reform Medicaid in ways that will truly better serve the needs of our most vulnerable.
You don't think their budgets are going to get busted down the road, Vice President Pence, that their budgets are going to bust up down the road with more burdens on the health care and they're not going to have the money to cover it?
Well, I honestly believe that the answer in the 21st century, and the president believes this, the answer in the 21st century to our health care needs is the American solution of more choices, more free market. I mean, you give the American people the ability to buy health insurance across state lines. You give states the ability to reform Medicaid. You create these laboratories of democracy and innovation. That's how we've always solved complex problems in the history of this country. Mm-hmm. And that's how we will chart a healthcare future under President Donald Trump that the American people can afford and that leads to a better quality of life and health care for everyone.
Vice President Pence, it is always such a great pleasure to have you on the show, and we really appreciate all your time. Thank you so much for what you're doing for this country and what you're doing for this administration. Thank you.